It's about to go down this week. There is quite a lot of intense energy. There's a lot of shifting going on. This is either going to be kind of a catastrophic week, but I think nonetheless, in our own personal lives, there is a lot that is shifting for us. So let's go ahead and get started talking about it. Welcome back to the Astrology Report. My name is Cam White. This time we were talking about February 12th through February 18th of 2024. Pretty big week. This is one out of, I think, 3 of the hardest weeks. I don't think I would consider this number 3 in terms of the hard weeks. There's just one in particular transit that could be very bad. I'm still debating on how bad it will be, but we'll go ahead and talk about that. But let's go ahead and start talking about Monday. So on Monday, really the only thing that we've got going on is the moon. It will leave the sign of Pisces. It'll make a quick sextile to Mars before it leaves, and it ingresses into Aries. Mars, with the moon just being in Aries, I think we're going to be a little bit more charged up, a little bit more motivated, a little bit more amped. Moon in Aries is kind of combative, but at least like we have like that ambition. Our emotions are very connected to what actions that we're taking. I might have said this over the past couple of weeks, but I think it's so worth saying again because it's something that has just landed with me recently and has been really helping me out. But it's like your mind follows your body. Like you can't change your mindset. Like, okay, if you're feeling negative or depressed, you can't change that just by doing mental gymnastics. Like the best thing that you can do is doing something physical, whether that's going for a walk, whether that's doing a workout, whether that's, again, cleaning something. Getting your hands busy will change your emotions. They will change your mind. I think the saying was like, your mind follows the body essentially. And I think with the moon in Aries, I think it's just a really good time to like invest our emotions into what like physical output we are putting out. Yeah, we're going to be a little bit combative. Yeah, we're going to be a little bit, kind of antsy, a little bit edgy. However, the moon is really just kind of hanging out in Aries. There's not too many transits that are happening with that. And so then we get into Tuesday. And it's really Tuesday and Wednesday that are the big days. And the big thing that we've got going on is Mars conjoining Pluto. That is our main highlight. Or my bad. That's for Wednesday. Well, technically Mars conjoins Pluto late in Tuesday night going into Wednesday morning. But we have Mars ingressing into Aries. Fuck, I keep messing this up. We have Mars ingressing into Aquarius. We have the moon in Aries making a sextile to Mercury and conjoining the North Node. We have Venus making a sextile to Neptune as well. And so why Tuesday is kind of a big deal is, again, we're really getting ready for the Mars-Pluto conjunction. Now, if you would have watched my 2024 year ahead predictions, I talked a lot about this being like, hey, this may not be that good of a transit. This is kind of like I have my eye on this. And I shared a CNN post on my YouTube channel about a week, maybe a week and a half ago, that the FBI director went in front of Congress and said like, oh, by the way, China's like kind of getting ready to target our critical infrastructure. If there was a transit that was really symbolic of cyber warfare, I think it would be Mars conjoining Pluto and Aquarius. These 0-degree Aquarius hits have been really big over the past couple years. We first had a Mars-Saturn conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius, which was the lockdowns. This happened at the very end of March of 2020. Then we had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, which kickstarted the whole triplicity shift, with Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions now happening in air signs for the next 200 years. That happened on December 19th, 2020, and that was the emergency use authorization of the inoculation. Now, we've had Pluto ingress into 0 Aquarius before, but what's more important is that this is our first transit, like our first planet hitting Pluto. And this is Mars. This isn't like Jupiter or Saturn. This is a Mars transit. Mars is very close to us, right? And so given the past history of these, again, like the emergency use authorization was a really big deal. The lockdowns were a really, really, really big deal. And, just to comment on that, I don't think I would be so, when I kind of get like, sometimes, I'll make my delineation episodes about what I might think will happen. And, when I talk to people about it, they're like, oh, that would never happen. I would lean more towards feeling that way too, but they locked the whole world down. Like that to me is, I can never go back to a frame of mind that says like, oh, that's just crazy. Oh, that's just impossible. Like the whole world was locked down. Like what else could possibly happen that is not crazier than that? And so we have Mars ingressing into Aquarius, number one. As Mars goes into Aquarius, I don't even see this as much as like a Mars ingress as it is Mars really conjoining Pluto. Now, I'm going to give it a couple degree orb, meaning like, okay, for example, maybe it's not Tuesday or Wednesday something happens, but around this time with Mars near Pluto, I'm going to give you guys a scale for perspective. I think on like a world level, on my craziest tinfoil hat, level, I think this would be some sort of a cyber warfare. I think this would be possibly grid down. Mars is, again, fights and conflicts, and it's in Aquarius. We are talking about society. We are talking about people. We're talking about Pluto, conjoining Pluto, corruption, power, fear. You can even look at it as like terrorism. I think on the craziest slider scale, somewhere between like a mass terrorist attack and, again, grid infrastructure being shut down, whether that's from, a foreign adversary or, again, maybe just a coincidence. That's me on the crazy, crazy scale, right? And I'm, my issue with looking at these transits is like the Mars-Pluto conjunction may not be anything. When I was doing my research on my 2024 year ahead predictions, there was a couple transits that, like, again, like I wasn't expecting very notable plane crashes to be so big during, I think it was Mars-Saturn conjunctions. And there was a couple of like mass shootings that came up. And so I did some research into mass shootings in terms of like what astrology transit. And there wasn't like really anything I could see off the surface that like, each mass shooting had this, transit going on. And so I look at that as like, okay, do I want you guys to live in fear? No. Is it probably smart over the next couple of years? And I'm going to talk about this in my delineation episode to have some sort of a plan or some awareness of the situation. Yes, I think the big thing that I think is important for people is just having an awareness that like, hey, things are going to get crazier and crazier as time goes on. And I don't think that's a reason to fear, but I think having the awareness of it and not like putting your head in the sand, I think is like the biggest first step that you can take in like knowing what, can or can't happen, knowing what you will do in one of those situations. And so the Mars-Pluto conjunction, again, on an extreme level, maybe it's a mass terrorist attack, maybe it's cyber warfare. That's what I'm really looking at. However, bringing this back down to more of a personal development, area, Mars going into Aquarius is very like, it's a two-way street of either like going AWOL, like a soldier going AWOL. Mars is, again, like fights, conflicts, kind of like separating itself from the group identity. The other way, though, is like stirring up or being a little bit more rambunctious with a group identity. Leading a group, there being this kind of like mass formation of a group, that being combative. And there's times where those things are good and there's times where those things are bad. You know what I mean? I've gotten comments recently, because I've talked about like the protests for, against like Starbucks and shit like that, not being effective. And people are like, well, but look, they lost stock. It's like, these are giant companies. If they lose a little bit of stock, that's fine. They're going to end up buying it back anyway. And their stock's going to get inflated. And guess what? We're still bombing the shit out of Palestine. It doesn't actually do much. And I think it's really important if you are going to be associated with a group, like what is the end goal of that group? What can it actually do? And I think there are a lot more effective ways to protest against things like, again, if you are very passionate about Palestine and Israel, I mean, a big way is just like not paying your taxes. But that's a whole different story. And I don't say any of that to like attack anybody here, but it's more so of like, this Aquarius stuff, as Pluto goes through Aquarius, I think you will see like more demonization and weaponization of these groups of people. I think that you will see a multipolar world where the U.S. has been kind of the dominant power since World War II, essentially. And I don't think the U.S. is going to lose that power, but I do think that there will be other powers that rise up. And again, we live in a multipolar world. I don't think so many things are as like, this is the good side, this is the bad side. Everything's very fractional or fractioned or what's the word I'm looking for? Fractured. That's the word I'm looking for. And so as Mars goes into Aquarius, there's more of this like our energy and our drive being a little bit more like either disconnected from things, or I think, again, finding again, who is our tribe? Who are our people? I shared this on my Patreon live stream last night about technology. Because the other thing I think with Mars Pluto, when I think of Mars Pluto and Aquarius, I think of because everyone knows that the Apple Vision Pro came out, and a couple years ago I saw like an artist make this VR headset that had like these lobotomy spikes on it, and it's like you put it on and the idea is like it gives you like a lobotomy or instantly kills you. Like if you lose in a game, you lose in real life. And I think it was like an art piece. It wasn't real because again, that would probably not be good. But that's what I think of when I think of like Mars, Pluto, and Aquarius. It's kind of like this, again, fear around technology, this fear, this panic around groups of people, around, again, society. And so I think there's kind of this ever-growing discontent with everything. Like I've just seen a lot more people being a little bit more like, why do we have to have so much technology in our lives? Why do we have to be so, why does everything have to be so divided in this engineered way? But what I meant to say a minute ago when it comes to like what I said on my Patreon was, I think a lot about the zodiac sign Sagittarius and how Sagittarius is like, there's nothing new under the sun. And this is what's fun about astrology. We might look at the future and like, oh, there's transhumanism and, they're going to put chips in our brain and all that kind of good stuff. Sagittarius tells the story of man and machine forming together. The centaur with the bow and arrow. What does it mean when man has, again, evolution, like created an evolution around its invention? We can go back to starting fires. We can go back to throwing rocks. We can go back to the bow and arrow, the sword, copper. We can go back to, making bullets for guns. And so I've been thinking a lot about this zodiac sign of Sagittarius and how there's an inherent story being told in our cosmos about man meeting machine. And I've just been thinking a lot about that in terms of, as Mars conjoins Pluto and Aquarius, is like, what do we have this sense of like empowerment with our tools, or do we have this sense of like fear? Do we have this sense of feeling locked down, again, in a digital hellscape? I don't know. I'm kind of just going off here, but because my thing is like Mars in Aquarius isn't just like, oh, Mars is in Aquarius now. It's like Mars is conjoining Pluto at this 0 degree mark that we've had. I mean, again, the last 2 times we've had major conjunctions or any conjunction at 0 Aquarius, those were really big deals. I mean, I think we also had a Venus-Mars conjunction in Aquarius at 0 Aquarius. Like, I think it was like a week after Russia invaded Ukraine. So I find this degree in these conjunctions to be like kind of big deals. Like they don't seem to be that very small. And so I try to read this as a little bit more of a bigger picture. And I think as Mars goes into Aquarius, we will be more personally feeling either like more disconnected from a certain tribe or a group of people, wanting to like feeling hostility there, feeling like again like an AWOL soldier going its own way. Another way I look at it is possibly feeling more activated or feeling more called to work with the people that are around us. Mars is fights and problems and conflicts, and it is in Aquarius. So we are talking about technology. We are talking about society. And I think there's this like part of us now that Pluto's in Aquarius that's kind of like really trying to understand how to navigate this area a little bit more. And what's also interesting is on Tuesday, the moon will be in Aries. It will sextile Mercury, and it will conjoin the North Node. So this is the other reason I don't care for this transit that much, at least just for right now, is while the moon's on Rahu in North Node is very like this innate desire, this hunger and this urge to, again, like I feel like moon and Aries conjoining the North Node is so like it's kind of like when something happens to you, let's say, someone cuts you off and you just want to like lay on the horn and flip them off and drive in front of them and cut them off too. And it just reminds me of like road rage. It's like you're so emotionally caught up in that feeling that you want to react immediately. And so that's why I feel like Tuesday's really triggering in a lot of ways. I think the moon making a sextile to Mercury is a little bit of like, again, mental gym. I love thinking about Mercury and Aquarius as mental gymnastics. And that can be both a good thing and a bad thing, right? I think a bad thing is like when you're trying to like rationalize something and you're doing a bunch of mental gymnastics, versus I think with what Mercury and Aquarius is really good for is like technology, in terms of like, hey, literally what mental gymnastics can we do to create like I think of like the Apple Vision Pro, for example, all of the little cameras that it has and it's following your hand movements and all of the other things is really incredible. Like it's not a simple piece of engineering. It's a really complicated piece of engineering, but you get really cool things out of it. Like that's how I think of like Mercury and Aquarius, where like there's times where it's like going through all of the hoops and connecting all of the dots can be really, important. And I think on other ways, it's also like, again, when you're just trying to make something simple and make things, make sense, trying to do all these mental gymnastics to rationalize something that may not be rational doesn't really work all the way. So the other highlight that we have on Tuesday is Venus sextiling Neptune. And what I do like about this is, again, Venus is pleasure. Venus is fun. She's making a contact with Neptune, being creative, having a vision. And again, this is what's fun about astrology is like two things can be true at once, right? Like there can be something bad happening while also simultaneously something good happening. You just got to know what planets rule what in your chart to see what parts of your life this is going to be affecting, right? Like, for example, Mars might be going into your 11th house of friends. So there might be this kind of problem with friends, but maybe Venus is in your 10th house, like sextiling Neptune, in Pisces. So there's like kind of this cool career thing that you've got going on simultaneously. So you really have to just kind of like, again, know how to apply this in your chart. But I like Venus sextiling Neptune because I think just allows for a sense of, creativity. When you have an efficient system and a plan, and you kind of see the results of that, like when you kind of just stick to, again, like the script almost in a way, I think it just allows you to see other opportunities, see other possibilities. It's like, let's say you've done one thing one way your whole life. You decide to learn how to do it like a very traditional way. You learn how to do it, and that gives you a lot more creative room in terms of how you can do things moving forward. But that brings us to Wednesday. And on Wednesday, it's like really Tuesday night, early Wednesday mornings when we have Mars conjoining Pluto. And so I kind of count these transits happening at the same time. I think Mars conjoining Pluto, number one, is, again, coming back to more of a personal level, is kind of like this battling fear and battling, some of our corrupted ways. I think for whatever reason right now, I think in society, we justify like evil action, like even like you, like we will have someone wrong us or do something. And I just see like on social media all the time, like people just justifying really shitty behavior. Like, oh, they did this to me, so it's fine if I do it to them. And it's just kind of like, I mean, are you wrong? Not per se, but are you right? Not really. And so I look at Mars conjoining Pluto as this kind of like feeling like there has to be some sort of a action you have to take that, can be evil. Like, again, no one's looking, so I'm going to do this. It's kind of like stealing a cookie from the cookie jar. No one's paying attention, no one's looking. What's stopping you from doing it besides your own goodwill? And so that's how I kind of look at Mars conjoining Pluto. It's just kind of like the desire to maybe take an action that isn't good, that is maybe corrupted, I think is higher on that day. And we're all, we might like to think and justify to ourselves that we're good people, but we all have these impulses to do things that maybe, aren't actually good, but we find ways to justify it. We find ways to go around it or reasons or excuses as to why to do it. I think another way I look at Mars Pluto on Wednesday is feeling, again, just angst, feeling anxiety, feeling overwhelmed. I also like look at Mars conjoining Pluto is it's kind of like a two-way street of feeling like so empowered and so on like a sick one, which I like, but it's almost like to a disgusting level to where you feel like, well, for example, I've used a lot of drug analogies before. So any of my coke heads out there get this one. It's like when you've done so much coke, you're on a sick one, but you're also so much on a sick one that like you can't physically do anything because you're just so yacked out of your mind. You're like, I feel good, but like it's hard to like move a body part, or it's like hard to like you sip water and you could barely sip the water down or something like that. I know a lot of you may not relate or understand that, and it's probably a good thing. But Mars conjoining Pluto is so like feeling both a mixture of like heightened anxiety and fear and panic. And I think that's going to be more true this time around. I think on a positive note, this is a very intense, powerful feeling. And I think there is an opportunity here where it's like, okay, can we release our inhibitions? Can we feel the rain on our skin? Can we take advantage of whatever ambitious feeling that we have? Can we use this empowered feeling to make some massive change in our life? I just think Mars conjoining Pluto, though, tends to be more corruptive. These are two bad planets. And so I think number one, just the feeling of feeling like very overwhelmed with what to do. It's kind of like, when I think of like legal systems, like if you are a human being in America, and I'm sure in other parts in the world, you've probably been a victim of the system in some way where you just feel so disempowered, where it's like, you have to navigate this, you have to navigate that, and how do you go about this? And it's all the way around. Like, I felt like I had to deal that with the last place that I lived in for a couple months when it came to like just being like, what are my fucking rights as a tenant, and how do I get around this? How do I do that? It's very hard to navigate the system. There can be just like this feeling of like disempowerment, and I think that's very present on Wednesday. And yeah, the other thing that we have going on Wednesday is the moon, while it's in Aries, is going to be making a square to Venus while it's in Capricorn. It'll ingress into Taurus. It will square Mars and Pluto. Well, Pluto, then Mars. It will then conjoin Jupiter and sextile Saturn. So the moon's kind of got a lot going on. I think the moon in Aries making a square to Venus is, again, our initial impulses aren't in aligned with, again, what our desires are or what we actually value, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like, oh, I feel like I need to do this, but I actually don't want to. I actually know that that's probably not what's going to be good for me. It's like, for example, if you're like a painter or an artist, it's like you're drawing something, you have this plan, you've worked it all out, and you're like, oh, well, what if I did this? You have to like grab your hand and be like, no, don't do the impulsive thing that you can't do again. Like, you can't undo that. But then as the moon goes into Taurus, I feel like there's, at least on paper with the moon going into Taurus, is like, okay, our emotions are a little bit more calm, more stable, feeling more secure, but it does immediately make a square to Mars and Pluto. And I feel like with Mars, the moon in Taurus squaring Mars and Pluto, it's like, okay, well, if all of this stuff is happening, let's say, I have this overwhelming sense of fear, or for example, in the world right now, people, I feel as if feel threatened or locked down by whatever, group identity, that they might somewhat relate to, like, opinion on anything else. Like, this is why I've been thinking a lot about the Leo Aquarius axis, and it's like, you can have a group identity, like that's very Aquarius, but at the end of the day, you're all individuals. That's very Leo. And you can get in a group of people that you think you're all on the same page, because you're all on the same page on one thing, but then realize on another topic, you guys have all very different opinions. And I just feel like with the moon in Taurus squaring Mars in Aquarius, it's like where you want to feel that security, where you want to feel that safety, there's this disruption going on with, again, maybe that's people, maybe that's technology, maybe that's just like wanting to, again, maybe just the Mars Pluto is an overwhelming sense of anxiety that makes it feel like you can't receive that, like, again, feeling stable, feeling secure at first. But as the moon then makes its way to first sextiling Saturn and then conjoining Jupiter, I think as by the time we get to the evening, that eventually wears off and you find a way to get comfortable. You find a way to find some stability. You find a way to, for example, like there's flooding right now in San Diego. And it reminds me very like Mars, Mars in Aquarius, Mars, Pluto in Aquarius, for example, is like just a good, again, example. There's all this disruption going on, right? The moon's in Taurus. It's like, well, I need shelter. I need food. I need water. And it's like, oh, well, all like the electricity's down, and where do I go for this? Where do I go for that? Like, I need to be rescued. There's like this kind of like, panic in sense of like, you need certain things to feel comfortable, but you can't get them right now. But as time goes on, you find your other neighbors, and maybe your neighbors, or again, like FEMA comes out with some water, or, you find a shelter for the moment. That's how I look at like Wednesday. Wednesday's kind of like this very impulsive feeling to need to feel safe. And you might not get that at first, but as the evening goes on, that will happen. You will get that. And then the other highlight I have is on Wednesday, we have Saturn sextiling Jupiter, or Jupiter sextiling Saturn. I'm not sure which one to call it here, because this just caught my attention last minute. This will be within a degree. So Jupiter, we already had our Jupiter Saturn sextile, I believe that was in maybe June of 2023. And they've been retrograde. They got really close. And this is the closest that they get. And so I think there's something to say, though, about Jupiter sextiling Saturn as kind of like if Jupiter's in Taurus and it's very like, all right, what do we value? What is going to make us more secure, more grounded? Sextiling Saturn, which Saturn is in a Jupiter ruled sign, there's this kind of like, hey, what, again, discipline or what systems or orders of operations that we have at our disposal to do that at are ever changing. And there's kind of like this kind of getting it figured out with Jupiter sextiling Saturn. Like on a bigger level, it's like, all right, like I'm good for right now. I've gotten this figured out, and I just kind of have to keep going on my day. So then we get to Thursday, and the moon, while it's in Taurus, will square Mercury and conjoin Uranus. So I think the moon squaring, Mercury is kind of like, it almost reminds me of like ergonomics, where if you, let's say you sit at a desk all day long and you're trying to find like the ways to be the most comfortable while also still doing something, like Mercury and Aquarius might be like, look at this, we can look at this way of doing things, or I see this way of doing things that I think would work really, really well, but it's not comfortable. It's not, stable. It's not sustainable is probably actually a good word here. And then as the moon conjoins Uranus, there is a little bit of a disruption. There is a little bit of a feeling of not being grounded fully with the moon conjoining Uranus and Taurus. But there is this kind of exciting, like, okay, well, there's a solution to this. There is a random thing that you can figure out. Again, sometimes if you like to, what's that term? MacGyver stuff, right? Like a little bit of duct tape, a little bit of engineering, a little bit of just figuring out as a way to fix something. That's how I almost look at like the moon conjoining, like moon squaring Mercury is like, okay, I like this idea, but it's not comfortable. It may not be sustainable. What can we do to fix it? Moon conjoining Uranus is like, hey, again, brain blast sort of a moment. If you watch Jimmy Neutron, and getting something figured out to where it might work. And then we get into Friday, and this is when Venus goes into Aquarius. And this to me is what's really interesting because, okay, so Venus goes into Aquarius, the moon will then go into Gemini and trine Venus, trine Mars, and trine Pluto. And then Mercury makes a square to Uranus. There's kind of a lot going on Friday where the vibe shift this week is, I think, just really important because like everything goes into Aquarius, but it's also like Mars and Venus conjoining in Aquarius. Again, the last time that we had that was around February, March of 2022. There was a lot going on then too. And with Venus going into Aquarius, Venus is a lot more fun. Venus is a lot more pleasure. Venus is a lot more of like, again, connection. And when she's in Aquarius, there's a little bit more of a, I get so many people arguing about this where everyone's like, well, Aquarius is actually like the loner and Aquarius is actually like weird and different. And I think that's true to a degree because I just think you end up getting that as a result of like what Aquarius like as a like archetype means. Like Aquarius is like a society forming, like that's literally what it is. And so I feel like with Venus going into Aquarius, there might be more of a fun feeling of, again, going AWOL. But I think there's another part of it where, and this is what's hard about reading just Mars going into Aquarius, because it's like, well, Mars immediately conjoins Pluto, but then Venus enters the chat. And it's like, okay, well, now there's like this kind of drama and there's this kind of fun and there's this kind of like connecting with people here where it's like, for example, maybe Mars in Aquarius is like in the olden days, the town gets together to protest against, whatever, like, some guy comes into town and shoots somebody and they're like, we need to hang him. And then like, that's very Mars in Aquarius is like angry mob. And then Venus comes in and then you're like talking to this guy next to you because you're both there for the same reason. You're like, and you start getting along, you make friends with them. Like, that's almost how I look at this is like the group dynamic forms over hostility, but then there's kind of like a friendship part of it that comes in too. So I find it really weird, and I'm really curious what ends up happening. So if you're one of the people that go through this and watch this throughout the week, let me know what ends up going on for you. And I think that doubles down because the moon goes into Gemini, and it trines Venus, it trines Pluto, it trines Mars. Where the moon in Gemini, we're communicating about our emotions, we're talking about how we feel, which I think is really important right now too. Like, in terms of everything that's going on, like people are so like, they just don't want to talk about how they feel about certain subjects. Cause again, they don't want to be ridiculed. They want to be attacked. And I just think regardless of, what your opinion is on it, for example, well, actually I don't want to go into that. But when you talk to people, like you're going to realize how many people actually see things kind of similarly the way that you do. They may come to different conclusions or different solutions, but I think just communicating with people, I think is so important. I think there's a lot of really good communication happening on Friday with the moon going into Gemini, trining Venus, trining Mars. But Mercury squares Uranus. This is kind of like, again, mad scientist, in my opinion, like very like, what happens if we pour all these chemicals together? What happens? The other thing is though, is like Mercury in Aquarius squaring Uranus and Taurus is very like, it's kind of like playing telephone. If you've ever played telephone before, what the phrase or the sentence starts off with is not how it ends. And Mercury in Aquarius is like, before you know it, it turns into this whole thing. And it causes all of this disruption. So Friday is really weird in terms of like, all of a sudden we're connecting and we're sharing, but then as we communicate, things kind of unravel from there. I I find that also difficult to really put in the lens of like your own personal life, because it's like, okay, well, I don't know, maybe you talk to your, I don't know, like I'm a Sagittarius, so this is all my third house. Maybe I, start talking to my neighbors more and I hang out with them, but then I don't know, that turns into something. Like my creativity is limited here and how I could think that would play out in like someone's personal life. But like, that's just kind of the way I'm seeing Friday. We get to Saturday and then Venus conjoins Pluto, where again, I look at like Venus conjoining Pluto as like forbidden love, or again, like corrupted desires. Like Mars conjoining Pluto is like corrupted action, or like again, Mars conjoining Pluto is very like war crimes. Venus conjoining Pluto is indulging in, the desires that are forbidden. I would look at this if you're in like a relationship too, like Venus. And again, this isn't for everyone that's in a relationship, but like Venus conjoining Pluto is kind of like, are you feeling empowered by this relationship, or are you feeling like afraid or fearful? Is there some sort of like manipulation going on? And it is an Aquarius where we're talking about people and identities and groups of people and how we all interact and, what forms our society. And so I feel like Venus conjoining Pluto is kind of like, again, feeling very overwhelmed, where it is kind of like, for example, I was not really on board with a lot of the BLM protests that did turn into riots. And a lot of people, I know that's such a controversial thing, but they turned into riots. Like, it is what it is. But I can tell you this. I bet you it probably felt pretty good to like throw like a Molotov cocktail at a Target and then like loot a store. As much as I disagree with it, it was probably a little fun. And the reason that came up is I just saw like an Instagram reel where this girl was like, when I was a part of the George Floyd protests, and later that night, the group I was with like robbed my house. It's just very Aquarius. And that was all during like Mars Saturn stuff in Aquarius too. But, Venus conjoining Pluto is just kind of like, there's a little bit of fun in doing bad things. You know what I mean? Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think that's an excuse to do bad things, but I look at Venus conjoining Pluto as desire and fun and pleasure, having a more intimate connection with, again, doing it in a corrupted way, doing it in a deceitful way that might feel empowering. Like, it might feel good to break the law or do something bad. And there's truth to that, but it's also like, why do you feel that way? So I look at Venus conjoining Pluto as kind of like, again, it's Pluto, maybe feeling some anxiety and fear around what your perceived pleasures are, or what is fun for you, or what is enjoyable for you, especially in a group dynamic context. But then as we get into Sunday, the moon, while it's in Gemini, will make a trine to Mercury. It will then square Neptune. The sun ingresses into Pisces, and then the moon goes into Cancer. And by Sunday evening, it gets real wet. We get into Pisces season, and things kind of chill out, in my opinion, even though they do get towards more of the Saturn stuff. But on Sunday, the moon, while it's in Gemini, trining Mercury, is, again, I think just more about connecting with people and sharing ideas. I think it's really important to have a community, to talk to people. But I think as the moon squares Neptune, it's kind of like, after you might have this conversation with people and then be kind of left with more questions than you do have answers. And I don't think that's like a bad thing. It's just one of those things where it's like, when you get information from someone and you think you're going to get all these answers, and then you get those answers, but that leaves you off with more questions. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just more of like, it is what it is. So that's how I look at Sunday's moon transit. And then as the sun goes into Pisces and the moon goes into Cancer, I think the sun leaving its sign of detriment, being, at least it's not exalted, it's not really doing anything, but at least it's not down bad. I think our sense of willpower, our identity, our energy becomes a little bit more heightened. It is a little bit more sensitive with the moon, with the sun in Pisces. And then the moon goes into Cancer and trines it, where it's like we go from all of this air stuff, very intellectual, to very like sensitive, emotional, giving and caring kind of a sense. So there's a real big vibe shift on Sunday night, going from like very intellectual, and I always mess this up and you guys always correct me, right brain to left brain, right brain to left brain kind of vibe, or maybe it's left brain to right brain, whatever is the kind of more intellectual to the more artsy, like that's kind of the shift that we have going on Sunday evening. But then next week, we have Venus conjoining Mars. We have Mercury ingressing into Pisces. We have the full moon in Virgo. We have Venus squaring Jupiter and the North Node on top of Chiron. And I don't talk about Chiron a lot, but I think the North Node on top of Chiron is important. So make sure you guys stay tuned for next week. We'll go all into that. Let me know what your thoughts are about Mars conjoining Pluto. what you guys are expecting for yourselves. And again, if you watch this throughout the week and you come back, let me know what ends up happening for you guys. So with that being said, I love and appreciate you guys, and I'll be seeing you next week.